This morning, a powerful conversation. Representative Jean Wu is one of the few Asian American members of the Texas legislature with us from Houston on the political action now likely to emerge from the recent violence against Asians. Plus, what's it like inside a temporary camp for migrant kids? Our interview with Congressman Van Taylor after he spoke one-on-one with children detained inside. The mayor from Midland frustrated at being blindsided by another camp in his city. Mayor Patrick Payton, looking to get questions answered, is with us from the Permian Basin. And legendary investor Warren Buffett might have a solution for the Texas electrical problem. We'll talk about what he would get out of it as well.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers all across the state. Let's begin this week with the top political headlines here in Texas. In Minneapolis on Monday, former police officer Derek Chauvin will stand trial for the killing of George Floyd. But already in Austin, state lawmakers there are considering legislation named in Floyd's honor. It would take aim at police brutality, banning chokeholds, and requiring officers to intervene if they see a colleague using excessive force. Governor Abbott has not commented publicly yet on these sweeping police reforms, and there seems to be scarce Republican support so far as well. Remember all the talk about gun safety legislation after the massacre at that El Paso Walmart and the killing spree in Midland? Governor Abbott even formed task forces to deal with this. He held hearings all across the state. Clearly, though, COVID and the power failures last month overshadowed all that. But Texas lawmakers are talking again about letting you carry a gun without having a permit. And a reminder to get your news from a trusted source. Congressman Pat Fallon, a Republican from Sherman, found that out last week. He cited an article to ask the Southern Poverty Law Center why it labeled the American Legion and the VFW as hate groups. Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center did not label them as that. Turns out Representative Fallon got fooled on this one. Fallon cited his evidence from a satire site called the Duffel Blog. Let's begin now with that growing crisis on the Texas-Mexico border. Unlike Trump, President Biden is not sending migrant children back to Mexico. He's allowing them to stay here in the U.S., but where do they all go? There's already an overflow center in Dallas and Midland. On Friday, another opens out in Pecos, which is out in West Texas. Our first guest, Congressman Van Taylor, a Collin County Republican who toured the Dallas camp and talked with children there. Congressman, it's good to see you again. Tell us what you saw inside when you got there.
What I saw was heartbreaking. You saw thousands of children, 13 to 17-year-old males coming in from south of our southern border who are, in a facility that literally the lease was signed last week and is full this week. So just an incredible influx of these children. We're doing, the U.S. government is doing the very best it can in a crisis level of care. And that is the words used by the officials there. This is a crisis level of care. So you've got 2,300 cots in one room, and you have children sleeping head to toe, literally, across this enormous space with 2,300 cots, and they're in groups of 50, and they're being taken to showers and to 5-minute supervised shower. They're going to lunch, they're going to breakfast, they're going to dinner, and the object is just to help them to survive. I mean, you're literally in survival mode.
And these are boys ages 13 to 17, and you actually got a chance to speak with 3 or 4 of them in Spanish. Tell me about that. What did they say to you?
Well, they had all been journeying for about a month, walking, through Mexico, 2 from Honduras, 1 from El Salvador, 1 from actually Venezuela, who flew to Mexico and then walked up to the border. And then they turned themselves into Border Patrol as soon as they got across the border. They spent a period of time with Border Patrol where they entered, and then they had been in the facility for a couple of days. And it's really heartbreaking what they went through. Obviously, as an American, my heart really went out to these poor children.
How about comprehensive immigration reform? Everyone's talked about this since President Reagan. It's a political football on the left and on the right, but no one actually wants to tackle it.
Well, I think that we need to do it. as you know, I was a Texas legislator, and we did big things in small pieces. And so you look at all kinds of different issues, but looking at immigration, I think that there are some big things that we can do, but I think we need to do them in small pieces. But what I will say is a mistake. Last week in Washington, the Democrats in the House passed an amnesty bill, which sends the exact wrong signal and will actually accelerate the humanitarian crisis on the southern border that's coming into our communities, right? It's right here in Dallas. That's a direct result of flawed policy and flawed rhetoric, which is reckless.
Did your visit to the Kay Bailey Hutchison Convention Center in Dallas, did that change any policy mindset you might have?
It really underscored how heartbreaking this is, that there is a human impact, a human effect. I mean, people are suffering as a direct result of getting rid of policies that worked without having any clue what the next step was going to be. And so now you've got some really great professionals out there doing the very best they can. I mean, I'm talking about doctors, I'm talking about Red Cross volunteers, I'm talking about HHS officials, FEMA officials, and we're having to throw a tremendous amount of resources. I mean, real dollars are being spent. We're having to take cots for FEMA, we're having to take toiletry kits from FEMA, we're having to take clothes from FEMA, rations from FEMA, all kinds of stuff is having to be drawn down. We're drawing down our own FEMA supplies to handle a self-inflicted wound. This is unquestionably a self-inflicted wound. And I would hope the Biden administration would take it seriously, call it what it is, and address it accordingly, and know that the way to handle it is to secure the southern border.
Congressman, we appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Jason.
Let's shift topics now and talk about something from left field that landed at the legislature last week. Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha. One of his companies told Texas lawmakers that they could help solve the Texas electrical problem. They would build 10 new natural gas power plants in Texas for emergency use, like last month, per se. But Buffett is a smart guy. In return, he wants lawmakers to put an additional fee on your electric bill each month. So before we try to book Warren Buffett for our program here, let's get the background on all this from Ross Ramsey. He's the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune in Austin, as always. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well here. Texas always likes letting private industry take care of problems. Is this something that lawmakers might seriously look at?
Well, he's basically asking the lawmakers to tell electric ratepayers in Texas to pay a surcharge to build 10 plants that Warren Buffett would operate in emergencies. If the legislature will go for that, it would be a new one. You're right to say it's from left field. It's, if Omaha's in left field.
and way north as well. Right. Starting tomorrow too, Ross, every Texan over age 16 can get a vaccination. But still, it's going to be a long, drawn-out process because supply hasn't caught up with demand.
Yeah, we've still got a lag here. I think in a minute we're going to be talking about we've got more supply than demand, but we're still not keeping up with the people who are eligible today, much less the number of people who are going to be eligible tomorrow when they let everybody under, I guess it's 50 now, into the deal. It'll be months.
Yeah, indeed so. Ross, back to you in a moment. Thank you. Coming up, a powerful conversation with one of the few Asian Americans in the Texas legislature on the political action likely to emerge after the recent violence against Asians. Plus, the mayor from Midland frustrated after being blindsided by a migrant camp forced on his city. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. Let's return to our conversation now about the temporary camps for migrant children. We talked about the one in Dallas a moment ago. The one in Midland, though, came as a surprise. That's what the mayor told us. We spoke with Patrick Payton from Midland.
Mayor, it's good to see you. I appreciate the time. I want to start with an issue you've brought up here. You said you've really had a hard time getting information from the people in charge at this, detention center for migrant kids. What specifically do you want to know that they aren't telling you?
We want to know everything about the facility. We want to know what's going on with COVID. We want to know how many kids are being shipped in, how many kids are being shipped out. We want to know the ages of the kids and exactly the ages of the kids. We want to know about workers that are in our community who are also around the kids with COVID. We want to know when you're going to shut the facility down. I could go on, but it's a short segment we've got here. So there's really not a question that's answered. We get one bit of information every day, and that is a census, which the census we get from them doesn't match up with simple math. So we just continue to approach it with great skepticism.
And Mayor, I presume one of the biggest issues is whether people in the community are working over there and potentially coming back out into the community and bringing COVID in or out. Is that it sounds like that's a pretty main concern of yours?
That's a legitimate concern. You've got people who've been brought in by the federal government that are not necessarily residents of Midland and Odessa, and they're working in the facility, then they're going and staying in hotels, eating in our restaurants. And these two communities have done a tremendous job to fight back COVID. We would hate to see COVID spread in our communities now, in spite of all of our efforts because of the federal government's actions.
Is there anything that the city of Midland can do?
No, we are uncovering every rock that we can uncover. We're uncovering every archaic legal precedent we can uncover. But the bottom line is, and this should worry Texans all over the place as well as Americans, if the federal government decides to come in and set up something in the middle of town or wherever they want to, they can do it. And there's really not a thing you can do about it.
And shifting gears here in our final moments, Mayor, there's about 60-something days left in the state legislature. Out there in the Permian Basin, West Texas, what are you looking for state lawmakers to get done?
Well, as far as legislation, we just like the legislature to do as little as possible to mess with our daily lives, but to also do everything they can possibly do to support the oil and gas industry, which is coming under attack all over the Permian Basin. So anything and everything they can do to make sure no one attacks this essential industry is vitally important for us. And if the question's related to what's going on with the migrants, they're literally doing everything they can do as well at the governor's office, lieutenant governor's office. So we're all fighting the same battles out here.
All right, Mayor, good to see you. We appreciate the time.
Thanks very much.
Now to a frank conversation about that violence against Asian Americans. They are a community not as vocal as other minority groups and not as well represented in government either. State Rep Gene Wu is a Houston Democrat and shares some of his own personal story with us after first discussing here the voting bills that Republicans are trying to pass in Austin.
Representative Wu, it's good to see you again. I want to ask you about HB 6, the election integrity bill, which is what Republicans call it in the House of Representatives. It was, came up for a hearing on Thursday. That hearing was delayed. Hundreds of people couldn't testify. Here's a question I have. If this ever gets off the ground, is there anything Democrats can do to stop this legislation, or are we expecting a party line vote here?
I fully expect a party line vote. And this has never been about election integrity. This has never been about voter fraud, because we've seen throughout the state, 2020, there were literally millions of Texans voting, and no one can point to an actual instant where this bill would have prevented anything. We're going to try to stop it in committee. We're going to try to stop it on the floor. We're going to try to stop it anywhere we can. And even if it gets signed into law, we're going to go approach it in the courts. I'm sure the Biden DOJ is going to come in and try to stop it through other means.
Let's talk about the violence directed recently at Asian Americans across the country and also here in Texas as well, too. Is there anything the state legislature can do to combat this?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that the state legislature needs to do, and all public leaders need to do, is first of all, just condemn it. Condemn the violence, condemn the hatred, and condemn the language that's been used for the past year.
Politically speaking, there are only 4 Asian members of the Texas legislature, which I don't think a lot of people know. You probably well know that. And that's about half of how many there should be if the legislature accurately reflected the population of Texas. Yeah. Why aren't more Asian Americans involved in Texas government?
For lots of reasons. This is a discussion that potentially could take several hours, but I'll give you a few quick things. First of all, Asian Americans suffer from, and I've talked about this before, suffer from perpetual alienness. That Asian Americans, no matter how long they're here, how good our English is, how successful we are, we're always seen as the other. We're always seen as foreign. We're always seen as alien, and it's hard for the community to gain traction sometimes in running for office and doing other things. At the same time, like a catch-22, because our community does not see Asians at the top in office, then parents go to their kids and say, you stay out of government. That's not for us. Our people aren't wanted there. We don't belong there, and so stay out.
Do these episodes of violence and racism, do they awaken Asians as a politically active group? Is that even accurate to say?
Yeah, I think so, and I hope so. And this is something that is a big problem for the Asian American community, because a lot of the places that Asian Americans come from, a lot of their home countries, their home cultures, have this sort of pervasive ideology, pervasive philosophy of, hey, you just need to keep quiet. So like in the West, we said, we have a saying that goes, squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Yeah. You got to speak up. In Asian countries, in my Chinese culture, we have a saying that says the head that sticks up gets cut off, right? And that's a totally different perspective of like, hey, you need to keep your mouth shut. And that's what, like, my own parents did not want me to run for office because it was making too many waves. And for a long time, a lot of Asian Americans said, like, hey, we gotta keep being the model minority. We gotta keep being quiet. And even when people hurt us, we need to be quiet and just keep working hard, and that'll protect us. What this last year has shown is it does not. It does not protect you. Being the model minority does not protect you. Your number just didn't come up yet. In 2020, our number came up. And just like the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Black community, the Hispanic community, the LGBT community, we were targeted. Our number came up and we were targeted for violence, and we got it.
Fascinating insight, Representative Wu. I hope we can continue this conversation, but we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Turns out Texas is one of the worst states in the country for hate crimes against Asian Americans. So considering that, why didn't more leaders speak out after the killings in Atlanta? We'll talk about that next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross Ramsey is back with us from Austin, the Texas Tribune. Joining us each week also is Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and of course Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. And Ross, will start with you. The Texas House took up two major Republican bills last week, gun legislation and other legislation also on the election law changes, election integrity, as the Republicans say. Is there anything at all Democrats can do to slow either of these down?
Well, I think the election bill is the one the Democrats really have their focus on. The gun bills are, fairly regular occurrences in the Texas legislature, but there's a big push to tighten up some of the election laws in Texas. The Republicans are generally for it. The Democrats are generally against it. And they're going to take advantage of every mistake the Republicans make, as they did with the Senate committee this week and then did again with the House committee last week. So I think that's going to be a tough haul. And
Bud, that's a good point, because we do see these gun bills in every single session there is. But the House couldn't get this election bill really off the ground in committee on last week, or Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah, the gun bills are kind of a knockdown, because the gun bills are what the Republicans all go back and campaign on. But the election bills there's going to be more turbulence on that. We saw that the only thing that can stop Republicans is other Republicans, as we saw. The House committee caved in with the rules of order problems, with 180 people left to testify and had to start all over. And then, the other thing that's going to stop some of these bills is a simple conflict between the House and Senate. You have a lieutenant governor who's feeling a little stung. You have a House speaker who's kind of feeling his muscle, and they're going to butt heads on some of these issues.
It's something we might have to watch for. Bernadine, you're raising your eyebrows there. At the end of the day, elections have consequences, and Republicans still have a clear majority in both chambers. Can Democrats do anything?
No, I don't think so. I think that they can slow it down. But as you say, Republicans control both branches, but also, actually all three. But actually, it's going to boil down to, when elections come, that the different candidates and different parties get their voters to the polls. And they're going to have to educate, because the Republicans in Texas, such as state, countrywide, they're changing the rules. They're changing the voting laws. And that's just going to happen.
Ross, let's shift off to the other big topic we spent some time on in this program, and that is the violence against Asian Americans. Texas is one of the worst states for hate crimes against Asian Americans. Why didn't we see more leaders in this state speak out after the violence in San Francisco and the violence in Atlanta also?
I can't really answer why they didn't step up. I know that, some of the legislators are trying to push these issues in this legislature. There are some other things in the way. I could be charitable and say they were worried about the freeze or they were worried about COVID, but they didn't step up this time, and it's a mystery.
And he is being charitable there, Bud. There are huge Asian American populations in Dallas and in Houston as well, too. And we didn't hear from state leaders.
We saw more local leaders speak out in Houston. The Democrats in Houston speak out. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Asian community is dispersed among Dallas, Collin, and Tarrant counties. And Collin and Tarrant are pretty red and didn't seem to take up the issue. You did finally see Angie Button, from the legislators speak up and say something. But there wasn't much said at all by leaders in Dallas-Fort Worth.
But Bernadine, this doesn't seem political at all. If there's violence against anyone,
No.
Shouldn't somebody say something?
You know what? I'm like Ross. It really is a mystery as to why you didn't hear more leaders stepping up. Now, I would venture to say, this is just speculation that, you really don't want to speculate, but that some of the Republicans perhaps didn't want to, because you would have to tie it to former President Trump, who sort of coined the virus about China virus, which caused some of the backlashes against Asian Americans. But other than that, it is a mystery.
All right, guys, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for that. And thank you as well for joining us for Inside Texas Politics. We're back again next Sunday. Hope you can join us then. Take care. Have a good week.